We may not know each other that well, but I can almost guarantee you I know one thing about you, and it happened on Sunday. You were standing at the door, and someone walked by and said, as they were leaving, "Great word today, Pastor," or something similar. It happens all the time. And I think it's great to hear it, but there's another question I think worth sitting with. Great word for who? Welcome back to the podcast. If we've never met, I'm Gavin, and you may know this. This podcast exists to help people just like you, pastors like you, add more intention to your mission. And today we're talking about being more intentional around sermons, because what we're going to talk about is a decision that most sermon prep skips entirely, and it isn't a study prep or a hermeneutics step. It's actually before all of that. And once you've seen this step, I think it may change a little bit about how you prep. So let me give you a scenario. It's 11, 47 on a Sunday morning, and you've wrapped up the service, or maybe it's 12:15, and you're standing at the door and you're shaking hands, and someone says, "Great word today, Pastor. Really enjoyed the sermon today. Thanks for the word. Thanks for what you said." And people, I think, mean it, and everybody feels that it was fine, right? And then someone else says it, and a third person says it, and I know I have sat in this place for 20 years. It feels good to hear all that, and it's kind of supposed to feel good. But here's the question: very few of us are asking in the moment. A great word for who? A great word today, Pastor, but a great word for who? Because in that same lobby, in that same 10 minutes, there is a guy who has been checking out Christianity for a few weeks, and he still isn't sure if any of this is real, if it's helpful, if it's hopeful. There's a woman who's been a believer for maybe a year or two max, and she really doesn't have any idea what to do on Monday morning. She's working through it. There's that small group leader who really needed one sentence that he could repeat to his group on Tuesday night, and he's trying to lead his group well, but the message didn't help him with it at all. There's someone who's been at your church for years, decades, and they're unfortunately comfortable, and now they feel like they're coasting, and no one really challenged them, and your message wasn't really challenging for them. I mean, think about it. In a way, there are 4 different sermons that were needed on Sunday, and you preached one sermon. And so, great word doesn't really tell you if it worked. It just tells you that the room was pleasant for, a few seconds as they left the door. So here's the principle, that it really kind of comes down to 2 habits that in a way pull against each other. When we're writing a sermon, there's a question that we ask all the time, right? What does this text mean, and how can I say it well? And I love those questions. I went to seminary like a lot of you. I've studied all the, exegesis, hermeneutics, all that. I get it. And I love that question. But landing a sermon asks a different question. Who is this actually for? And did it reach them specifically? Most of us are really good at that first question, but we've just never really formally asked the second question. And so we end up writing and preaching without ever having thought about who we are writing for, who we are preaching for. And I know those 2 questions can feel a little similar, but they're really very, very different. One is about content. The second question is about the person who's going to hear the content. And if I know you, hopefully you're hoping they will do something with what they've heard. So if we skip that second question before we begin writing and studying and even especially preaching, we end up skipping the person and preaching a message. And we end up hearing the same thing over and over again. Great word, Pastor, great message, Pastor. And the door is going to keep telling you that everything is just fine, even if it isn't. So here's the diagnostic question for us here. I'd love for you to pull up your last few sermons, maybe 3, and just the bones. Don't have to get a whole transcript or anything, but just kind of look at the outline you used or whatever you took, onto the stage or you had on the confidence monitor behind you, and just ask this: can I name specifically who this message was built for? Like, look especially at your application section. Like if it says something like, let this challenge you, or, let this encourage you. that's probably targeted to a category because that's a phrase that's a tell in a way. And here's what we're going to find. We're going to kind of find three kind of categories, maybe, once you look at it closely. Category one is you built a message for a room. The language is broad enough to apply to everyone, which in practice means it's actually not doing anything specific for anyone. You may be built for one type, but only one type. And that's good in a way. At least you were thinking about a person and it was very specific, but it only reached one category of people and left everybody else on the outside kind of looking in. Of course, the last category is, it was built for a named person with an application specific enough that they know exactly what to do with it on Tuesday. Most of us are living kind of almost entirely in the first two categories. We either don't have a person we're thinking about, or we have a person we're thinking about, but we try to still include everybody in the process. And I get it. I think we should include everybody to some level, but specifically targeting your message to a category of people makes that message infinitely more effective. In fact, once you kind of see how your sermons are being written, it's kind of hard to unsee it. And it really gives you a couple of different moves that you can take. And you could take them this week. In fact, strategically, you could, begin to think about who you're writing for before you write. My son right now has started this thing called The Gathering. It's a church service. Well, it's not a church service. It's a space for primarily younger people, 20-year-olds, 20-somethings, who are working in churches, working in ministry, who really don't ever get a chance to just sit in a space with the Holy Spirit because they are always working in that space. Now, here's what you should know about The Gathering. My wife and I go to it. The rest of our family, our other children go to it. Lots of other people who aren't in that category go to it. But if you were to ask my son, when you are writing the message for The Gathering, who are you writing it for? He would tell you that 20-something-year-old who is working in a church and doesn't have an opportunity to experience church. That's who he's writing to. Now, I'll tell you, I enjoy it. I take something away from it, but it isn't directly intended for me. So when you think about your sermon, and I'm not, listen, I get pushback on this. I understand the pushback, but when you think about the sermon that you're writing right now, is it for the seeker? Is it primarily for the student, the shaper, the steward? I would put one of those names at the top of your outline. And as you're writing, keep coming back to how is this going to be said so the student can hear it? How are we going to challenge people so the shaper feels motivated? I mean, whoever you're writing to, try to narrow the focus down so that everything in the message is applicable, directed to that person. Now, once you do that, listen, that sermon is going to feel like you're missing some people, and that's okay. There's always next Sunday, right? But here's the promise I can make you. If you are trying to write every message for every person who is in the room, you're never going to fully reach the individuals in the room. So start broad if you want. I do that. Narrow it down so that you're beginning to focus on one category of people, and then make sure your application is targeted to the person you are trying to move that day.